Hello and welcome to all the members of the Horde and the Alliance. I'm Joe, here with me is my co-host Stan.
Hello and greetings.
And today we've got the next part of the First Wars. Technically, people tend to call this the beginning of the Second Wars, but that makes no sense, as the division between the war with Stormwind and Lordaeron as two separate wars was really dumb. This is in essence the same war. It is simply that the Horde moved from striking at Stormwind to striking at Lordaeron. We're not creating a separate playlist for this because that'd be dumb on our part, so we're not even going to humor this by calling it the Second Wars. Now, you can call it the Tides of Darkness period, but this is still the First Wars. That disclaimer aside, Anduin Lothar does the only intelligent thing he can do. The Kingdom of Stormwind is in ruins. The people are under the thrall of the Horde now. He has to accept facts, grab what he can of the nobility and the royalty and what peasants he can run into along the way, and what knights he can gather, and run to Lordaeron. But nobody could blame him. To an extent, Lothar had not really done anything wrong militarily. He had been fighting as best he could, and even Lane had done some pretty good sound decisions. The problem is, everything was undone by Medivh. Now, I am not going to undermine the redemption and the importance of the redemption of Medivh. While he was within the thrall of evil, he screwed over Stormwind, or at least the Rin dynasty. That said, Lordaeron at this time was ruled by a king called Terenas, a powerful monarch who at this time had not yet gone feeble. Later he does. A courageous and mighty warrior king who was far more brilliant than Lane. Not to insult Lane, it's just Terenas at this time was brilliant and fierce. Unmatched as far as the kings and rulers of any nation goes. It was to Terenas that Lothar threw himself at the feet of and begged for support from, with Terenas having previously preferred to scorn Stormwind. It is only with the fall of the Rin dynasty that Terenas realized, yeah, this is starting to get out of hand. Heir to the Rin dynasty within his reach now, he now had control over the destiny of Stormwind. This was also a very political gesture on his part to move forward. Typically, people tend to perceive Terenas as this weakling who honestly never had either a backbone or never had any strength to him as a king, because mailed fist of this king were either Arthas or Uther. But the reality is that before either of them were a political factor, Terenas was the big guy on the block. This is about 20 years before the third game. Arthas, we have to bear in mind, is in his 20s in Warcraft 3. Terenas is in his 60s. Before then, he was in his 40s, and he was a beast of a man. At the suggestion of Lothar, called for a council of the Seven Nations, which saw the forging of the Alliance with Terenas as its head, and Lordaeron firmly in control of the military and naval might of the Alliance, and at the helm of everything. Lordaeron would end up starting to gear itself up for war to aid Varian in the reclaiming of his throne. In the meantime, Doomhammer, who had seized the capital of Stormwind, immediately was faced with the problem of remnants of Gul'dan's faction turning on him. When Gul'dan awoke from his coma, a little confused and shocked to find all his supporters dead, from Garona to Blackhand and whatnot, and his faction in disarray, Gul'dan threw himself at the feet of Doomhammer, realizing he could not defeat him at this moment. Doomhammer, in a rare moment of pure stupidity, decided, okay, I'm going to recruit Gul'dan to my side. He soon put Gul'dan to use, supplying him with information on the remnants of the Shadow Council, hunting the rest of Gul'dan's faction down, which Doomhammer then did, rooting them out, almost root and stem, crushing all opposition within the Horde, except for Gul'dan. Gul'dan, meanwhile, was put to work on putting together a new cavalry division for Doomhammer, and it is at this time that Gul'dan created the most powerful of all horror-based undead creatures in fiction, Death Knights. In turn, though, these Death Knights would serve really well. They're created from the Stormwind Knights that's fallen in the Battle of Stormwind. Gul'dan had positioned himself in the middle of the castle and taken it on as his newfound home. Doomhammer would go to press forward, wanting to cross the sea and attack Lordaeron. But first, he had to move into Khaz-Modan. It is there that he would conquer this northern territory, trapping the dwarves and gnomes within Ironforge and Gnomeregan in an act of military genius. It has to be recognized that Doomhammer is probably one of the most brilliant military minds of Warcraft history, striking so quickly that he knocked off two members of the Alliance.
And this is something that he seems to like to use, preemptive strikes.
In real life terms, he'd probably be comparable to Julius Caesar. He takes a lot of risks, but he has a lot of luck and a lot of skill. Now, meanwhile, it's not to say that the alliance of Lordaeron was inactive. It's at this time that Terenas founds the Order of the Silver Hand and begins training the first paladins. These guys are to become an incredible fighting force. At the start, they're probably made up of priests and knights gathered together to train together and mix their techniques. This is Terenas preparing for a mega war. But the founding of this paladinic order is a brilliant move on his part. He would appoint a man by the name of Uther Lightbringer as the head of this order. But at this time, I would argue Uther probably had the best of intentions and was dutiful and loyal. In the meantime, Orgrim builds the first Orcish fleet in present-day Menethil Harbor, that's named after the Menethil dynasty that rules over Lordaeron, would plan to sail around the Thandel span and into Hillsbrad, so that the war between Lordaeron and Doomhammer was officially on. With Death Knights on one side, Paladins on the other, the Alliance rapidly trying to organize itself and overcome its shock at the swiftness of the fall of Stormwind. He was not the greatest of kings. Stormwind was in decline, but one should not write off Lane so easily. He must have looked fairly secure, ensconced on his position, so for him to suddenly be cut down, along with Medivh to be revealed to be a traitor, Lothar, who is very renowned as a warrior, is driven out. Everything is going to pot in Stormwind, and the Horde have suddenly burst onto the scene, and they immediately move to cut off the dwarves and the gnomes. For the Alliance, they got to scramble. They honestly didn't expect the Horde to do so well. They thought that this was a minor issue like the Gnoll and Troll rebellions of the previous couple of decades, and now they understand just what they're dealing with. He was not a charismatic individual, and I don't say that to insult him, I say that as a matter of fact. Lane was regarded probably as a figurehead for Lothar and Medivh. There was only one figure who could rally the clergy of the continent and who could rally all the nations, Terenas Menethil. Makes him one of the most important figures in Warcraft history. And yet, he's one that there are no real books about, except for maybe the Arthas novels, and who's generally disregarded by a lot of fans.
You have him going up against Orgrim Doomhammer, a new giant on the scene.
Of these two great men, only one of them could be left standing. The question is, which one? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were Arthas taking down Sylvanas Windrunner.